We're glad to have you back. Still staying with the speech of President Bola Tinubu. Yes, speaking around monetary policy and also issues surrounding the Central Bank of Nigeria. The president agreed that there needs to be a lot of work regarding the economic policy of government and, of course, the CBN establishing rates. I introduced him earlier. His name is Mr. Kwaga. He's a senior research and policy analyst with Budget. Mr. Kwaga, it's good to see you. Let's get talking. Very quickly, I'd like to start with security issues and the implications for the business community at this time. What is your reaction to that, looking at the speech from the president yesterday?
Hi, Tolu. It's always a pleasure to be on the program. So thank you for that question. I think security is easily one of the most important issues for Nigeria at the moment. Looking at the fact that between 2015 and 2022, almost 55,000 Nigerians have died due to security-related issues. I think it would be safe to say that security should still be something on the front burner of this new administration, as it were. Looking at the amount of investments that had been made by the previous administration on security, which in many budget years was easily one of the top three sectors to receive the highest allocation. One is concerned that the amount of spending by the previous administration, looking at the fact that there was even a supplementary budget. I was actually in your studio to discuss that sometime in 2021. The supplementary budget of 2021 had, additional allocations for security. Yet Nigerians were still bedeviled, on all sides by these security issues. But it's good to see that, in his inaugural speech, Bola Tinubu was able to at least give some policy statement to how serious his government would take the issue of security. And I like the fact that he mentioned doctrines and he mentioned architectures. It's good to see that there is a clear line of thought, at least in terms of how this new administration aims to, to take on this issue. And of course, that's not just physical security, but financial security, economic security, especially for businesses, for the financial sector, to ensure not just that, the manufacturers of goods and the producers of agricultural produce can take their goods, whether they be primary or tertiary, to the point of sale. But even financial transactions are protected by top-notch security architecture. So it will really be interesting to see how this new administration would balance out, itself in terms of those who would man its key agencies and how they would put paid to these policy statements that, of course, would be, boosted by some action in the coming months.
A good way to start now, Mr. Kwaga. But according to President Tinubu, GDP is expected to grow at 6%. If that happens, that means our growth rate will be higher than our population rate. Invariably, that means that more people will be out of poverty. How achievable is this?
That is a very, very, very fantastic claim. I would love to see it happen. Even the most optimistic projections from, I think the IMF recently reviewed their projections, the World Bank and IMF's projection for Nigeria's GDP in 2023, or at least the third quarter, is around 3.1%. The new president intends to do twice that amount. It's going to be very challenging, seeing as the fundamental structural issues with gross domestic output have not been addressed. And they are the issues that revolve around the productivity of the various sectors in the economy. Looking at the NBS report, I think the first quarter of 2023, the top three highest sectors are crop production, trade, telecoms, and crude petroleum and natural gas. Now, these have been, I mean, in addition to construction, these have been, I think, the top performers in terms of GDP output. And if you look at oil and non-oil GDP contributions, you see that oil has actually begun to diminish rather significantly and has been moving between, I think, 6 to 4%, I think, in the last 7 or 8 quarters, while non-oil GDP has actually maintained a relatively strong position at around 92, 93, 94 in that range. And, this talks about the performance, but moving that up to making it twice what it is. I think 2022, we had about 212 a trillion naira in GDP. So we want to be doing around 400 trillion naira in terms of GDP. That would require the entire value chain. That would require deep, engagement with the states as well. Because one thing, analysts and I think observers tend to sort of overlook at times is when we talk about improving productivity, we're talking about improving the 4 factors of production, in their very essence. So we're talking about land reform, we're talking about research and development and access to credit for entrepreneurs. We're talking about, ensuring that the doing business environment and all the infrastructure that makes it productive, that enhances the work of businesses, is actually made as optimal as possible. This would mean, massive investments in road infrastructure. This would mean massive investments in the way we even do business in terms of government regulation. There was once a picture that went viral online of a man who had to take his goods through a particular state in the Southwest. I can't recall what state that was. And he was showing, depicting the number of levies that he had to pay. These may not show up in formal measurements, but these are the monies that businesses have to pay. And this was someone who was moving primary goods. This was someone that was moving agricultural goods, not even something that he had to expend serious energy and waste management as would someone in the manufacturing sector. So, these are the types of things, these are the structures, the structural impediments that this new administration has to really take very seriously and cannot do on its own. One thing I've been joking about quite recently is how President Tinubu has to engage better with the governors than previous administrations have done. And I think this is very critical because seeing as Nigeria practices federalism, in theory, the role of the center is for coordination, and at the very least, the management of very key critical governance entities such as currency, foreign policy, and defense. Then you can leave some other aspects to the states to do. Unfortunately, our center has a lot on its plate, but this outgone administration has started to devolve some of those items to the concurrent list, like the railways and the energy generation. So I think Tinubu needs to do much more than Buhari has done in terms of giving the states more responsibility to ensure that that aspect of production, since Nigerians reside in states, is taken care of, and this GDP can actually improve to what the government aims it to be.
Great stuff. The much needed support from the fiscal authorities, of course, generated comments all through former President Buhari's administration. Many talking about that sync, that we didn't really get that synergy, the expected one, to make things work. You see them working sometimes at cross purposes. Do you think that could get better now? You've already touched on the kind of people that should hold positions, but are you thinking that that should be a thing of the past?
I mean, it's difficult to say, Tolu, really, because there has been some serious misallocation in this past administration that I think would not really see the impact until sometime down the line. The problem, like I always say, I've said this on your show before, problem with government policy and its effect on the economy is that we are constantly looking backwards. When you implement a policy today, you would most likely not even begin to see serious effects, or you may not be able to measure complete effects until 1 or 2 quarters down the line. So this means we are always correcting for impacts that have occurred for things we have done months ago. And, for this outgone administration, there was a real mismatch between fiscal and monetary policy, where you had the monetary authorities acting like fiscal authorities, and you had the fiscal authorities basically just, wringing their hands and looking on in desperation, because a lot of their mechanisms and tools, had to be subject to the approval of the National Assembly. I will say that one of the downsides to having a National Assembly that's unable to perform its true function of oversight and check and balance is precisely what happened with the outgone National Assembly, where this outgone administration had borrowed, nearly 30 trillion in ways and means advances. And for the Nigerians that do not know, the National Assembly has approved the amendment of the CBN Act, which allows the executive to take advances of up to 15% of gross domestic product. And, it's strange that if this outgone administration could have done this with impunity, and the new president belonging to the same party, will Bola Tinubu be able to show that restraint when it comes to pumping money, from the central bank into the economy? And, I need Nigerians to also realize that, the argument by the outgone administration was that the money was used to provide infrastructure. In some instances, it was even provided to states as a means to help them pay their salaries. That's a completely different conversation. But I don't know if that argument is tenable, because you are not only pumping the economy with money that is not backed by assets, but the productivity of these monies and the short to medium term impact would be things that would actually have to be borne out by evidence, for us to say, okay, this is the impact over this period of this infrastructure, of that infrastructure on the economy. And these things, will not be seen, or these effects or impacts may not be seen anytime soon. So for the new administration, what Bola Tinubu really needs to do is, as the president, you must ensure that your minister is towing a specific line and learning, monitoring, and evaluating decisions made. And when there's a serious sense of the importance of data gathering, the government must demonstrate how it is learning from its fiscal policy, its taxation, and its expenditure. How is it preparing its expenditure frameworks? And how realistic are the projections, based on its interventions, based on global macroeconomic conditions, and based on, its own revenue generation? How realistic are its budget projections, compared to how much money it aims to make and how much money it aims to spend? During the previous administration, we saw a lot of deficits, especially between, spending and revenue. We also saw a wide disparity between spending on, a non-debt recurrent and debt recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. And that actually portended to be very dangerous for the economy going forward, because essentially you had the government spending more, on recurrent items, overheads and salaries. And that speaks to the issue of, the fiscal and monetary authority mismatch. Then you had a monetary authority in the central bank that was issuing out, lots of loans to medium and large firms, which it should have diverted that money to the MSMEs. Now, I'm not saying that it did not do that, but the proportion of loans, given to those larger firms was actually very unhelpful to the growth of MSMEs, which, form over 90% of Nigeria's firm number. And again, this really speaks to the issue of how the monetary authority, as the CBN, is not really designed to be a bank of that nature. The challenge really lies in developing the capital markets and the real sector, the financial sector, to provide short-term finance or credit, to businesses, as opposed to a regulator, like the CBN doing that kind of job. So, in short, the new president, Bola Tinubu, really needs to ensure that though the central bank is quasi-independent, it does not do things that harm the economy in the short to medium term.
Well, it's a good way to leave it. We still have a lot to talk about, actually, but let's leave it at that today. Maybe we'll get to talk about the other issues some other time. Mr. Vaya Kwaga is a senior research and policy analyst with Budget. Thank you so much. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Well,